Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Cudmore from Homegrown Learning Podcasts, sponsored by Collage. And today I am really blessed to welcome Fabienne Vailes, mainly because for me, what we're going to talk about today is the crux of living. And without it, for me, children can't really thrive. So Fabienne is a UK expert on emotional and mental well-being within the education sector and a specialist in stress and anxiety. She's also an author. She wrote The Flourishing Student, and she's worked and supported with all ages across the phases from nursery to young adults. Fabienne's a mum and more recently a home educating mum. So I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as the podcast evolves. But huge thank you for being here today, Fabienne, and I'm super excited. So thank you.
No, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about your journey and how you came to create Flourishing Education?
Yes. So really long story that I'll cut really short, because otherwise I'm going to bore you all with my long story. I basically used to have the business. It was under another name. It was to do with teaching languages, to all sorts of people like you've described, so nurseries and FE colleges and adult education. And then in 2014, I had the opportunity to go back to, my youngest started primary school, and I had the opportunity to go back to university, to Bristol University, to work in a similar role to the one I had 10 years prior. So very reluctantly, I went back because I wasn't sure I wanted to go back into higher education. But the universe seemed to be pointing this way. So I listened. I can be stubborn sometimes, but the universe is persistent. So I listened and I went back. And I'm glad I did, because in 2014, to say I was horrified about what I came back to is an understatement. So in less than 10 years, it was just under 10 years, the young people in front of me seemed to be completely different young people. And the way that was showing up is the amount of low subjective well-being that I could see. I guess that because I re-entered the French department, that I was there, sort of 9 years prior. The university, no offense to them, is a big in organizations. So like any big organizations, it takes time for change to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think it was the way we were teaching. It was clearly the individuals in front of me. So because I'm quite a curious person, I started scratching the surface and started talking to experts. And I realized that actually we have a problem with our young people, clearly being unhappy. So that's how the Flourishing Student, the first edition, came about. I then, continued the research and started exploring. So in the Flourishing Students, a model emerged for flourishing, which looks like a flower, really, from the interviews with the students. I was very lucky and privileged. The university gave me funding so I could continue with my research. And so I went on and looked at embedding well-being in the curriculum, because I realized individual well-being, focus on individual well-being wasn't the answer. So we tried embedding well-being in the curriculum in year 1, and I was like, oh, that's still not working. And then, the journey continued, and now I'm looking more at community well-being. So in between, I've actually collaborated with a GP called Dr. Dominic Thompson, and we wrote a book called How to Grow Grown Up, which was really a book for us as mums to sort of navigate, okay, what are the pitfalls or the things that we need to avoid so that our children don't arrive at the university feeling the way some of the students I was seeing, felt like. I'm going to also be really honest, we had, we as a school, the School of Modern Languages, experienced one of the suicides that we had at Bristol Uni. So for me, that was really traumatic because the students was doing Italian and French, and I think one life is one too many. So that's obviously, that was part of the reason for the research. And then I guess there was then, I can then continue for the journey, but really that's an overview of how Flourishing sort of education emerged. And it has been an evolving entity really as a business. It just keeps changing names and evolving, but I think that's because in life we are rather than being human beings, perhaps we are human becomings, as Benjamin Freud often says. I think that is true. We just evolve through conversations like this one, and perhaps that's what's happening with the business.
Yes, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And so talk a little bit about how you came to be a home educating mum, and whether that was always your plan or...
No, it wasn't my plan whatsoever. No, absolutely not. And that feeds into the rest of the story. So I would say the when I talk to people about my journey, my 25 years and the key sort of milestones. So 2014 was one date. The next date was, COVID and the pandemic. And finding myself managing the provision for the French language at the university. So you're talking over 800 students a year, 13 members of staff. We were asked to turn this provision almost overnight online, and then hybrid as we sort of slowly return to what people call the new normal, whatever that means. And also having to homeschool, and I use the word homeschool because it was literally doing the schoolwork given by school to two boys. So we are lucky to have two children, two boys, one who is now 15 in November, and the other one who's 12. And so at the time they were year 5, year 6, and year 7, year 8. And literally having to support them because I could see what was going on with the schoolwork, for the first time ever being privy to what they were being asked to do, and its impact on their well-being, but also suddenly realizing, literally going, this explains this, what I see at uni. So I was like,
yes, that connection.
Oh, okay. Year 5, 6 prep for the SATs, and being asked to do all those exams, or constantly doing papers and stuff. And then obviously the transition, I think, from primary to secondary is massive for children. I think, particularly for us, we live in a small village, and it was sort of 15 in each year, so year 5 and year 6 grouped together, so 30, but tiny school, just over 100 altogether, and then suddenly moving to this massive secondary school with like almost 2,000 kids is just really tough. So that was really a big moment. And then when we all started going back to normal and supposed to go back to school, my eldest, who is, I guess the way I would describe him is he's academically stellar. So he's one of those kids, you just give him anything and he gets it. And he's, so when he was in primary school back then, they still had this sort of gifted and talented labels that they like to give kids. So he was within that. And really during COVID for him, it was a real freedom. It was a real, he likes, the way I would describe my son is he likes deep dives. So he likes to go deep into a subject and then he emerges. And then he might not go and look at anything, and then he goes another deep dive and come back up and sort of integrates.
A bit like you, maybe.
Yes, maybe. The apple doesn't fall far off from the tree, is that what we say? So and I guess what happened is you know, as life goes, I started my career break. So I asked work after, because I haven't said, obviously, one of the things that happened during all of that is I did say to my boss, I felt like a squeezed lemon, and I haven't got a lot more juice to give, because I could really notice how it was affecting me, you know, my own flourishing, I guess. So I said to my boss, okay, I'll stay until we've got the hybrids sort of in place, but from September 2021, I would like you to literally give me a 1-year sabbatical for me to work out what it is I want. And I said to my boss, I'm not going to give you the skin and the pips. You're not having it. So that was it. And, you know, we agreed. And so 1st of September 2021, I started my career break with the really sad news that my father-in-law passed away really suddenly after 5 years of illness. So we knew he was very ill, and, you know, but after 5 years, you know, I think for me, I'm somebody who looks at, you know, I call it the universe, but, you know, like the signs, sometimes they really speak loudly. And that, he, you know, for him to pass away on the first day of my sabbatical is like, for somebody whose life is around work and on the hamster wheel, that was like, oh, okay. And then Tom chipped his femur, the bone of his femur, playing rugby.
Oh my God.
And so he was out of action for 6 weeks, so not allowed to go to school. He had to be literally homeschooled again. And during that time, I'd also started, you know, because of what I explained before. So I'm sorry, I'm connecting the dots now. You know, that realization that what's happening in primary and in secondary is the reason we see our young people at university so unhappy. I started a podcast, the Flourishing Education podcast. And during that time, obviously, I'd been talking to a lot of home educators, and I'd been sort of like opening my mind to what may be possible and different. So I interviewed people like Peter Gray on the podcast. You can imagine. You know, I remember I interviewed the first person who really shifted something in me was Mei Ling Thomas, who's a home educator, and who, like, you know, she said something and it really rattled my cage. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll just park it and then revisit it. But anyway, in the end, Thomas kept saying, I'm not happy at school, I'm not happy at school, please can we explore something else? And I was like, yeah, maybe, yes, maybe. And I kept sort of like literally fobbing him off. Until he looked at me one day and said, you know, all these things you talk about, like flourishing for adults, flourishing for other children, what happens when it's your own child?
Wow.
Okay, yeah. What happens when it's your own child, right? It's easy. When it's something else, and, you know, it was easy for me to shine the light on the podcast for all these amazing people who, to me, you know, as I was still like very much a product of the Franco-British education system and still on the hamster wheel, looking at them slightly like, oh, they're a bit wacky and a little bit crazy and a little bit like, oh, you know, this is quite exciting. Not quite sure it's for me though, you know. Suddenly when it's in your face, like right here, and you're being asked to put your money where your mouth is, like if that's your values. And literally after he'd said that, I could see his light just slowly being dimmed, like literally just, I could see he was just, yeah, well, okay, I'll just do what I've got to do. But yeah. And I'm sorry, I draw a line on, I can't watch my son dim his light. I mean, how can I, if I'm going to be talking about flourishing?
No, totally. Yeah. So a big change.
So I did what a lot of my friends who are home educators said, why are you even doing this, Fabienne? But I needed that. For me, it was literally, I had to break up with the system. It was like
Yeah.
a divorce.
Hmm.
And I know for the listeners, it might sound really overly dramatic and things. It literally was my way to just, okay, can we salvage this relationship? So I reached out to the head because I'd been doing pro bono work with the school.
Yeah.
With, helping during COVID around Flourishing and all of those things. So I reached out, went straight to the head, bypassed everybody, to perhaps the discontent of many who wanted me to sort of go first through the channels, but I just
Yes.
went straight to the head. We had a meeting, and I mean, his first response initially was like, well, no, it's not possible. Because I was like, could we do hybrid? Could we explore something,
Hmm.
But then I mentioned, and I said, Thomas, yeah, like UNCRC, like Article 12, children have a right to say what they want for their education. How does that fit in? And
Yeah.
so he agreed to see me and to speak to me. But then at the end, it was clear that it wasn't going to happen, that there was no space for that hybrid. So I wrote this letter to say we are deregistering our children in January. And then I sent it, and then I burst into tears. And I probably spent the following sort of 2 months, I would say, probably often rocking in the corner
Yeah,
of
I
my
just did
room,
that myself.
going, "Oh, what have I
Mm.
done?" And actually, that's something that I'll share also to the listeners. And I went up one day to see our Tom, our child, and I sat on his bed and sort of started welling up, and I said, Tom, as your mum, I never really swear to the boys, but I sort of said, I'm really, really worried now that I'm literally damaging your life, and I'm really concerned as your mum, because it's sort of like doing this thing, and what if it all goes completely wrong?
Mm.
And he turned around and looked at me and he went, nobody's going to mess up my life other than me, mum.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And when you said that, I was like, I think we're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
so what was lovely, I think, is that he initiated that request to
Hmm.
be home educated.
Yeah.
He is the one who said, I would like to be home educated. And he literally is taking responsibility for his
Yes.
life. And so it's not an easy journey. I mean we're still on this
No.
journey of, I'm not quite sure what it looks like, and it's an ever evolving, like the business,
Mm.
right? It's just
Yeah.
ever changing and evolving. I think the first sort of 8 months were more about deschooling ourselves, I would
Yes.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Less
Hmm.
for him, more for me.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. The
I
children.
think, yeah, I
I mean,
think,
I think it's kind of obvious in respect of like the length of time we've spent in the system in comparison to the children. And I think, most children don't want a replica system to what was in school. I think most children I talk to would love something totally different. So I think they're so much more open for, and I think it's about trusting, isn't it? It's like so interesting your son saying that, and your fears are all about you, but actually if we flip that and we trust our children want to thrive, but actually so often, and I think that's part of the system, we don't trust them. That's why we're force feeding them, that's why we're choosing the pathway, that's why we're that must have been a really big moment though when he said that.
yeah, it was very much I think we're okay.
Yeah.
I think we're okay. And in a sense that exactly what you described, I think very often part of the problem with when we are not flourishing, I call that languishing, but you could call it, being in survival.
Mm.
So the problem with being in survival is that it instantly turns us back to me, this physical body that needs protecting and needs, so it makes us fearful, of course, but much more self-centered and worried about like me.
Mm.
Um, and in that, I definitely was more concerned about what does it say about me as an individual, as a mum who is an educator, you know.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
how can I take my son out of the system when I'm a teacher, when I believe in the system, right?
Yeah.
So it's your whole identity that is being shifted.
Yeah.
um, and that requires quite a lot of yes.
Yeah, and I had exactly the same. You know, you're a head teacher. Oh, you're going to be all right. You can educate them at home. But actually, you know, it took us 2 years to shred everything up and to keep going back and going back to my gut and going, no, actually, it doesn't feel right. I don't need to do this anymore. And you know, it's huge, isn't it? Just going back to so you made that connection between your son being at school, being unhappy, and the connection with university students not being happy, and like, you know, the rise in young people with mental health. The stats are out there, aren't there? I think it was 1 in 9 5 to 16-year-old in 2017, and that's 1 in 6, and that was in 2021. But so do you think, other than the system, or is it all the system's fault that young people are suffering so much more with mental health?
Right, so there's several things I'd like to unpick in that. So I'm a linguist, and I think it's really important we look at the words we use. So first of all, the one thing that was really shocking for me when I went back to Bristol Uni and when I experienced what I experienced is that actually the use of the word mental health.
Yeah.
So because I'm
Okay.
French, mental health in the French language is like physical health. It's something we all have and we can look after. Okay,
Yeah.
so mental health equals well-being, right? We all have it, and if you look after it, you know, it's that sort of, you know, the ball in the middle of a seesaw, and if you've got challenges and resources, then you know your mental health, your physical health can be okay, right? It
Yeah.
needs to be sort of evened out. So the first thing that I noticed is the language. So in the UK in particular, we tend to use mental health and equate it to mental ill health. And that's where there's a bit of an issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are different levels of mental distress. So you've got mental health, which is what we have. And then I think if you experience challenges, too many challenges, not enough resources, then you go into more what I would call mental distress.
Yes.
And then if you stay there long enough, and you know, so I interviewed someone called Stan Kutcher in Canada, and he says there's a difference between a bad hair day, a bad hair week, and a bad hair month, and actually mental ill health.
Yeah.
So I would say, yes, there are some young people who clearly have reached a stage where we could label them as suffering from mental ill health, or having a mental health disorder that can be diagnosed by professional, you know, DSM-5, all of those things. But I think really for a lot of young people, it's literally what I was seeing with Tom, a cry for help. So I think for a lot of young people, in fact, I find it quite reassuring, because it just means they're still alive and they have a pulse and they've given up. So so I think that's the first thing I wanted to say around that, around the language. And around the fact that the system. So the other thing about the system, and I use that word too, the system is us. The system is our children, teachers, head teachers, policymakers, our politicians who make up the rules. It's us parents. So rather than talking about a system, we need to be slightly more like Thomas was doing with his taking responsibility. We all need to take responsibility. We are all part of this system we so call the system.
Yeah.
And so you know, it's all of us. So we're all part of the problem, but equally we're all part of the solution. And that's quite exciting and is great. Because I think when we start using words like the system, then it sort of pushes it back and sort of like says, well, the responsibility is with
it's
me.
not. Yes. Yeah, I can see
And
that.
I think it is. The responsibility is with all of us. And I find that, and again, you know, it's not to make anybody feel guilty, it's not to point any finger, it's just actually to use that as a very empowering thing.
Yeah.
Is that, and the exciting news is that we can all do something about it if we want to. And if we come together, we will have even more power.
Yeah. Wow. So, and you know, we've talked I think we've talked a little bit about this, but what actually happens when what's happening to us when we're having those little cries for help, or we've got mental illness? Can you explain
So I'll start with a caveat, and you know, a little bit like a disclaimer you would have. My expertise is not in anything to do with pathology or mental ill health. That is more my lovely colleague, Dr. Dominic Thompson, with whom I co-wrote the book. You know, she's a GP, she's a doctor. So like, I think I would say the message to me is, if your child is having more than a bad hair day or bad hair week or bad hair month, if your child is refusing to engage with life, like, you know, then please seek medical help and advice. That's the first thing I would say. So my area is not pathogenic, it's what I call salutogenic. So salutogenic in terminology means we all have this innate well-being in us. Okay, all of us. You know, in a lot of the, you know, Eastern philosophies, they call that chi, or, you know, life force, whatever, you know, call it what you want. Is this, you know, this life force that we all have. And so literally the way I would describe it is, if we are not allowed to allow this life force to show up in life, you know, dim our lights, whatever we are required to do, then at some point it will show up. So it will show up in the way we feel first, but if we're not prepared to feel those emotions, then it will show up in the body in some way or form. So I guess that's how I would describe it. And what I do, Flourishing, is all about, are we allowing ourselves to truly show up in the world as we were meant to show up? So it's about, as we come into this world, we are all you know, this little seeds with full potential. And it's when we come into this garden called life, if this seed is not allowed to come out, come through, emerge, and first of all be aware and understand what plant, tree, shrub, you know, what ecosystem you are, right? What's your fragrance? How do you show up in the world? But most importantly, if you're told, no, you're not this climbing ivy, you're an oak tree, imagine how confusing that is, because deep down you know you're that climbing ivy, you're not the oak tree. And so I think what's happening is we have an awful lot of different ecosystems in this system that has said, no, you are all mono, you know, there's only one monocultural, like, right, you're one plant, one tree, one shrub. And so that, luckily for us, this young generation, our children's generation, they're not settling for less. And so they're just saying to us, no, you're not going to shove me in this hole and decide for me what I am. But obviously they haven't got quite the words to express that. So the way they do it is through, you know, different routes. And that's what I truly believe is happening. So I also find that quite, you know, encouraging, is that,
I love that. I love that picture, just that picture of, you know, the ecosystem. You know, we need the weeds, we need the flowers, we need the trees, we need the, and actually in school, that's kind of the problem, is that all of these different are not able to be, and that's not, you know, no disrespect to schools and teachers, like how does a teacher facilitate that with 30 different plants in its room? You know, it needs a different way of thinking. But yeah, I love that picture. Thank you. And we've also touched on this, you know, we talked a little bit about deschooling, and it being a really important time, particularly, you know, well, essentially, really, if you're coming out of school to be home educated. And like you said, I think actually the deschooling of the parent is actually more important than the child. But so how, you know, perhaps it's a silly question really, but you know, how important do you think that is? I think you said it's really important, but how do you see that? How should parents tackle that sort of deschooling?
So it can't happen. I mean, it's like it's a must. It will happen, like literally. So I think it fits in also with what you just said previously when I was talking about the image. I think what happens is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
In the sense that you or at least, sorry,
No.
dog is barking because of the, go on your bed please. Good girl. Yeah, so I think that paradigm shift is required because the system, the schooling system, the education system we currently have is built on a system that is not conducive to seeing it as a garden and an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So we have a system that is based on, you know, it's literally from the industrial era. I'm not the first one to actually talk about that. You know, there's loads of amazing people who have written amazing books about this, but really put simply, our system is the result of this industrial age where we were preparing our children for the skills that are required in the factories and in the industry. And so it is very mechanistic, it is very reductionist, you know, so Newtonian sort of Cartesian approach. And so that literally means, first of all, we need to recognize that that's what is happening.
Yeah.
First of all, and then decide, okay, is that what I want to, for me the unschooling, deschooling, it's still ongoing, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
for the
absolutely.
listeners, please don't know that, don't think that that's it, you're done.
You're
No,
done. We can go now.
it's an ongoing journey. So for the listeners, for the sake of authenticity, the face you're seeing was crying her eyes out 3 hours ago, okay? And hence like the spotty face and all of those things, because actually I am healing. There's a healing, it's also part of a healing journey. Because it is almost like for me personally, and that's my experience, I don't know if it's yours, Sarah, but there's almost like an unlearning to relearn. So it's a letting go of all of those things, that all those beliefs, all those conditioning, you know, socializing that I was told were true. So, you know, I truly believed in, because that's how I was raised, you know, hop on the hamster wheel, get the A levels, the degree, the MA, the good job, the flat, the car, the first kid, the second kids, the house, the bigger car, you know, all of these things that I was sold. And then suddenly, as part of also all of that, is like, well, really, do I? Is that, you know, I think for me, as I said previously, my father-in-law died on the first day of my sabbatical, and something in me died with him. That Fabienne, driven to succeed, to be on the hamster wheel, who was slowly making her way through the greasy pool of educational sort of, you know, seniority. Like literally, I said this morning to my husband, I think I'm just made to do nothing. I just want to be and not work, which is obviously possibly not the answer, because it's the pendulum swinging completely the other way. I'm sure
But even
there's a
that,
middle way.
even saying that is like, is the old system where if I'm doing nothing, I'm not working, that we're, actually we look at children and we think, oh my gosh, they're not doing anything. But actually we're always learning, aren't we? We're always working, learning. We're all, it's never ending. It's just that, it's not a financial,
No, 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 no,
city.
no. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not,
yeah, 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 yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah.
So yeah, all that is deconstructing. So again, my message for parents is be prepared for turbulence, because there
Mm,
will be like moments that are really, really challenging. But actually it's through the chaos that emerges beautiful things. So I'm sorry, I'll go back to my preferred metaphor of the garden. For that seed to come through the ground, first of all it needs to unravel, like
mhm.
completely turn on itself to come out.
Yes.
And it needs to push through the soil, and that effort can be really tough,
Yes.
and requires a lot of strength. So yeah, it's all part of the process, and I think the more I allow to enter in that process, so the less mechanistic I am with, in terms of
Mm,
my approach, and the more organic I am,
mm.
so going with the process and sharing authentically, the easier it gets.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And in that process, you lose some people, some
Mm,
communities on the way,
mm,
but actually you live a much happier life. I was just, I'm sort of 6 years into this, and definitely, I think of it like weather, the storms come and they clear, and it all feels great and bright. And, my son yesterday had a birthday party at home, and grandparents came. They haven't been for couple of years because of various things. And I felt that inner expectation that my son should come and greet them at the door and do that whole hello, haven't seen you, cuddle, but actually because it was a birthday, it was all too much for him. He was in his room, in his zone, and he just needed to be left. And I did it, but it felt uncomfortable given he came out an hour or so later and said a few things, but that whole inside thinking, what the grandparents thinking, oh, that's a bit rude, he doesn't even come to, and all of that. So it's an ever evolving, when you're taking 45 years of the system out of you to kind of shed this new light, as it were, it does weigh heavy at times. I actually just think listening to you, just so much that I kind of cringe about when I think about myself being a head teacher. And I kind of, the times when I tried to encourage parents to get their children back to school, because I generally believed it was better for them to be at school, and actually,
mm.
no, they don't want to come into school today. Well, yeah, you've got to get over that and get them in. And also it helped my school data, attendance.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, of course.
this huge push again with government to kind of threaten families with non-attendant, and schools doing a whole range of ridiculous things to try and, but not listening to those
No,
flowers, not listening to those
no,
plants. And
no, 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 no.
um so I felt, really, really cringeworthy. But what advice would you give, like, parents that are struggling to get children into school? Is there any kind of, is it just be strong, listen, and kind of
I would say you know your child best.
yes.
So it wouldn't feel right for me to tell them what they have to do, as in, like, I'm not someone who likes to tell people, even though that in the book there's a flourishing model. um I very much sort of say, actually it's a flower, because that's like the organic thing, the way to describe it. But very much it's like, you know your child best,
Mm,
whether it's, it's something that's temporary, as in, like, there may be, because one thing we haven't talked about is that our well-being is not just individual well-being and or community or like the external. Because
Yeah.
through my journey, what I was seeing very much is, you were talking about your experience as a head teacher. So I think I started with I see this system as an engine, and there are cogs in the engine. And so what happens is you need the cogs to make the engine function properly. So
Yeah.
you need the cogs to come in. And so, like, well, let's focus on those parts of the engine and tweak it so make it rev better, not realizing that we were actually putting undue pressure on other parts of the system of the engine, i.e. staff. So I was like, right, that's not working. So the individual well-being, saying to people, you're not feeling great today, go and do mindfulness or Reiki or whatever, and then you'll be fine, when actually there's an issue with the system, right? That's not quite right. But equally, people would then say, so we tried embedding well-being in the curriculum. And then what happens is people then go, it's not me, it's the system. So sort out my environment and I'll be fine, I'll be sorted. And yes, that's true. But actually, it's not the whole story, because it's not individual or environment. It's and both.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's this idea that, so what I would say to parents is, if it's what's something going on with your child in terms of, with teenagers, there's so many, it's a really challenging time of their life. It's there's so many changes going on in their brain, in their bodies, through puberty and through no. So we know, for example, if you look at the data, that this is when mental ill health is likely to emerge. So if you are to have a mental health issue, or mental ill health, develop a disorder, that's usually when it sort of emerges. So I would say, obviously make sure that first thing, like, if you're really, really concerned, and I know it's challenging, currently with the system in the UK because of the waiting lists and stuff, but seeking help as quickly as possible, definitely, I think that's really important. But then after that, it's like, what would happen if we shifted the narrative, so we don't talk about an engine and forcing the cog to come in because it needs to be there, but actually view it as a garden, and view our children as this ecosystem. And sometimes they're not planted in the right place, and so it's just recognizing that this environment is not conducive to the flourishing of this particular ecosystem. It doesn't say anything about the garden or the place where it's planted. It's just that it's not the right place for this plant. No big deal, just plant it elsewhere so it can flourish. Maybe it needs a little bit more sunshine and less shade, less water, more, I don't know. And sometimes plants need a little bit of a boost. We give them a little bit of grow, because that's what they need right now, and that nurturing environment of being at home, because that's what you need.
I think there's a fear in that, that children will fall behind, and children will, and which I think is an interesting concept, because we had all this when children were not at school because of COVID, and the government said how far behind the children are, but it's not measurable really. And what I think, adding to what you've said, but in terms of parents, is just that actually when you're in that state, where you're off balance, even if it is just a day or a week, or actually you're not learning. And it's as adults, when we're having a bad day, it's the day when you drop the milk out the fridge, and it's all those things happen because we're trying to push through and carry on, and we're not going slow and just listening, but it's being reassured to know that actually all these children they're going to get to the place that they need to get to, whether that means that they need to take a couple of days out of whatever, or they need to take 6 months to a year or 2 years, they you know, and that sort of and that goes back again to what we were saying about trusting children, because actually they want to get there, they want to have this great life, but right now their well-being is not in balance, is it?
And I think you know, again, it's like, because I was there as a parent when, for a while before we deregistered, Thomas was like, I don't want to go to school and you can't force me, and I'm not going to go. I think what happens is, you are so right. So like the research, my research shows, when you're in survival, you know, there's a literally fight flight, and then, you know, if you stay there long enough, you then go into freeze. First thing that happens is your prefrontal cortex switches off, because it's like the executive function of your brain. Is, you know, literally you would find it difficult to concentrate, and you know, like all those things people talk about, foggy head, and you know, feeling like you can't really focus, all of those things is normal, because you know, I love it using that example. If you are, you know, when I say sort of switches off, it's not really switching off per se, but it's you know, if you see something that looks like a snake, you're not going to go and prod it. You literally keep away from it, or you know, run away, or whatever, because actually, even if then you discover it's a rope, because if you stay there long enough, it could kill you. So this is why, you know, the using your executive functions when you're in survival is not essential, because actually all of the ecosystem is trying to do is keep alive, stay alive, and using all that energy through the stress, and you know, to literally stay alive. So no, you know, and that rhetoric of, you know, so lost time and we need to catch up, we need to stop this, because lifelong, you know, learning is not just at school. Learning happens all the time. So for all the parents who, you know, during COVID baked cakes and, you know, did gardening or read stories, or you know, whatever, your child has not learned. You know, it's just that, behind, according to the government, because behind means towards the GCSE and the A-level curriculum.
They haven't prepped for the tests well enough to pass them.
Exactly. It's not, you know, it isn't about, you know, if we go back.
And the skills that they probably learn at home aren't measurable through the system, through the education. So, you know, there's nothing that measures you know, I can bake independently and I can do a whole heap of things that is not done in school.
But imagine, you know, so going back to metrics and measures, what if we measured flourishing instead of actually what we measure? And I would argue that part of the problem with what we do in the system as teachers and educators is that we keep pulling the plant up and going, have you grown? Let's measure. Have you grown? Let's measure. Have you grown? Let's measure. And then we wonder why they're not flourishing and thriving. Leave the plant alone.
And actually
trust.
And that's kind of the beauty of collage in terms of a platform, a portfolio, an individualized learning journey, you know. And I'm so relieved that, for, you know, in the last 6 months, universities, professionals, all sorts of people are starting to actually think about portfolios, because it is that is what is going to enable,
absolutely,
you know, to see the growth in the journey, as opposed to everybody getting to a certain point at a certain time on a certain day. But
unhappy and miserable.
Yes.
The result.
What do you feel like we you know, particularly, it's hard being a parent and trying to think about all the things that we kind of should be doing, but in terms of like well-being, what are the things that parents ideally would be doing? I think this links with the kind of deschooling. because inevitably what your parents are doing and how you're growing up and being part of a family, you know, is going to have a massive impact on our children. So what would you say to parents to kind of look at, reflect on, in order to kind of
Okay.
help
Yes.
from
So the other thing I say, flourishing education means flourishing students it cannot be if we haven't got flourishing adults. So I'll go back to my metaphor, and apologies if it doesn't resonate with you people, but that's the only way I can go back to sort of describing it. And my brain works in visual ways, so metaphors for me work. Again, if they don't work for you, I apologize. But I would say, view your role as a parent, and I believe it's the same for teachers, as we are part of a gardening team for this lovely seedling. And so if you, the gardener, is not well and is not feeling great, then you can't tend to the seedling in a loving way. So so I know it's become cliche now, the whole like put your own oxygen mask on, you can't pour from an empty cup, you know, self-care is not selfish, all of those things. But I really, really believe it's really important. And again, I'm not someone who's into models, systems like I have the answer. You have the answer for you. So you know, hopefully you know what tree, shrub, plant, shrub, flower you are in this garden called life. So, and you are aware when you need to take care of yourself. And so that you can then show up, like your fragrance can be the most beautiful to complement the beautiful biodiversity of this garden called life. And so that may be observing nature, being in nature, that may be prioritizing sleep, that may be keeping physically active, whatever that is, running, walking, cycling, yoga, I don't know, whatever floats your boat, right? Eating a healthy, balanced diet, making journaling for me works really well. Taking time away from our screens, connecting with others, finding like-minded individuals who are also home educators, right? Finding a community online and in this physical space where localized where we are, making time to enjoy the things we love, listening to music, dancing. My thing is like dancing in the kitchen. I love doing a little bit of a silly mummy dance in the kitchen. I don't know, you'll know, right? Everybody will have their thing. So I would say the gardener needs to be well enough to look after the seedling, to allow.
Do you think, because I certainly can only talk from my own experience, but I started out being 1,000 miles an hour, great, I'm so excited, we're going to do this and this and this, and putting all of this like oozy energy into like and truly like being led by me and not led by the children, so working through that deschooling. But I think for me, I had to learn about looking after myself because I burnt out and it was really not pretty. But the reason that I haven't ever looked after myself is like because I felt it was selfish to put myself first. And I think that is if you can know that if you do put yourself first, if you can start to embed some really great practices that just come really naturally, and I say to parents, it isn't about you once a month having a spa day because you could just time away. There is things that you can do instantly. It's things that you can wake up and think, I feel like this in my body, I need to walk around the block, I need to have some fresh air, and reacting. Those are the things that actually just tiny little things that are going to fill your cup and make you feel great. And I had it this morning actually. I every so often I like to give myself a little hot oil massage before a shower in the morning. It just makes me feel great for the day. And it was a bit of a rush this morning, and I just thought, oh, I won't do it today, and because of this, this, and this. And I had to stop myself and say, no, if you do this, you're going to feel better all day, and everything else is going to just feel so much easier than if you don't do it and you go through the day feeling you've not met your own needs. And it takes practice. If you're like me, I was a natural people pleaser, and unlearning that, and recognizing that I felt selfish when I was doing things for myself, that those are things that people might have to work through.
Yes.
If it doesn't come naturally to you, because I think
Yes.
our generation, it's not so natural. Hopefully
No.
our children, seeing that being modeled, will come through, and they will live life fully in touch with themselves to know those things. But I do think our era, we're kind of in between two.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what's happened is we don't take enough care of ourselves. So I think particularly women tend to give so much to their family, their friends, their work, their job, everything, and leaving very little to themselves. But also what I see in our children is that we do so much for them.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, that the whole, in the book How to Grow Grown Up, we talk about helicopter parenting. So actually this whole, like, I'm going to be over you and I'm going to remove all the obstacles for you, and all of those things. I think this is also something that needs to be addressed, because that is more to do with us. It's like this, oh, I'm going to give you everything. You're my everything. I recoil when I hear parents who tell me that their children is their most precious commodity. It just makes me, because that's not how I view my children. I view my children, and I apologize if that's how you view yours, but for me, the only thing I did is Khalil Gibral's work. You're the bow that slings the arrow forth. My role as a mum is I gave them my stomach, my womb for 9 months to nurture them, so that they could, literally gave them that space. And I view my role as that, as of like providing that nurturing space.
Yeah.
Always.
Being present with them.
Yes.
But not.
But that nurturing space also applies to us.
Yeah.
Right. It also needs to be that we are well enough so that we can be nurturing to them as well as ourselves. And so that's really important, really, really important to sort of like get a nice balance. So, it's like everything, right? Buddha talks about the middle way, and I love that. It is a very delicate dance.
It is.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it's like knowing, it's like dancing. You take a step and follow your partner, and then, next step and things. And this is the same. And I think what you said about role modeling, very important, because we role model.
Yeah, and I think particularly when you're home educating, because it's 24/7 with your children all the time. And actually, it isn't about whilst you're role modeling, it's the role modeling also through the really tricky stuff that's really, really important. Like, I've come out of, or my husband come out, and just like hand to head, really, endless meetings, and we've learned to kind of unpick some of those hard things in front of the children, actually, and let them see how we've solved things, let them see how we want to be able to, we're a generation of, or we're a society of very instant things as well. And I think that's really important, enabling young people to see that things take time to work through, and space and reflection, but when it's being authentic, isn't it? It's being not suppressing, not slapping plasters on. not helicoptering, but just being true to ourselves. And
Yes.
you know, it's okay to say to children, like, my cup's not full today, I'm sorry, I'm not so present with you, I'm going to spend the day just going a bit slowly, you know, we'll pick up on what you want to do, I'll make space for that tomorrow, but today I'm just going slow, and I might be a bit quiet, but I'm just listening to my body, and I'm going to sit and have my cup of tea. And you know, and you can do that with love and make them feel secure, but you can also let them know that actually you know what you need to do for yourself, and then the next day you deal with, you know, the project or the whatever they wanted to do, and you've got that energy to, rather than doing it because you're trying to squeeze it in and they want to do it and you're snapping and you're, but it's not, I make it sound like once you get it, it's like this perfect. It's not, is it? You know, I still have,
because it's emergent, and it's the ebb and flow of life. It's up and down, and you know, and I think what I really love you describing for me is what perhaps I'm being encouraged to do a lot more that I haven't done until very recently, and it's just slow down. Slow right down. You know, why is it we are so, I made Thomas, my eldest, chuckle the other day, because he said to me, I don't want to make you wait, because he sort of was going off to see his friends, and then I was like, well, you know, if you want, come and meet me at work and I can drive you home. And he said, well, if the bus is not on time. And I went, it's fine, Tom, I'll just wait for you. And you know, but I don't want to make you wait. And I went, you know what, love, I said, I'll wait for you 9 months. I'm sure I can wait for you 15 minutes. And I made him chuckle, because he's like, oh yeah, that's true. It's just like, I couldn't rush you. It's like, you know, I had to wait 9 months, even though all I wanted is to see you. So I'm sure, you know, using that analogy, the whole, like, what would happen if, as a society, as a family, as an individual, we all slowed right down, just one breath, right? Just like, okay, what's the hurry?
or even just enough to get back in touch with our breath and think, oh, actually I'm breathing really fast, okay, or you know, or just take one nice deep, I know it was, and again, it's a society thing, isn't it? You know, I think as soon as emails came in, it sort of created this, like, you know, constant your flow of stuff, and stuff happens quickly, and you're going to be reactive, and you're, you know, we do need to, but we're in, you know, home educating, we're in a perfect position to be able to do that. And I use it a lot with the children to say, oh gosh, I feel like we're going really fast today. Oh yeah, we've had like 4 days of like quite intense busy stuff. Well, today we won't, we'll just, you know, oh, you want to stay in your pajamas a bit longer? Yeah, we're going to do that, we're just going to go with the flow. And you do, and I can see in my children that they can see that at the end of that day they feel better, and we're all just going at a whole different pace. But I think throwing into that for home educating mums trying to work is really, really difficult. And I've had to, and perhaps this is a different podcast, but I've really had to think about how beautiful and how important my role as a mother is. And you know, because I was in that sort of mindset of, like you were, you know, you work hard, you get your job, we go on holiday. You know, I gave these kids 2-3 great holidays a year, it's amazing. And but actually really valuing as a mother, you know, the unpaid mum, what an incredible, I feel so great about what I'm able to do, and what I've been through this process, what I've learned about myself, and how important being present, and you know, that we get so much more joy than we did when I was earning a very good salary and we were having 3 holidays, just, you know. But anyway, I think we could
quality time, right? But that's what, and also again, it's the conditioning. So recognizing that the conditioning, our society does not value mums. Let's face it.
Like, no, when you look at that poster of all these great women in society, you know, over the years, and they've got all this, you know, the first woman that was a pilot, and the first, where's the mum on that? It really makes me annoyed. Like, it's the most precious, the most incredible thing that a being can do, and it's not really
It's not,
valued.
no, it's not, because it's big, because our society, with the industrial age, is also the fact that if you look, the nuclear, like the community has slowly, so I feel it an awful lot because I grew up in France.
Yes.
And in France,
Community.
I grew up in the 70s, 80s, where we still had a real sense of community. I think this is slowly changing in France, slower than in the UK. But in England, my research shows that the reason young people feel, so they tell us they feel like they feel like they have to compete, and they feel very individualistic. So it's like, but that's how our society does it. And people go, well, when I grew up, we had to compete too. No, yeah, okay, but not to the level and the extent that our kids have to. So switch on your TV and everything is about competition. You can't bake a cake without it being a competition. You can't ice skate. You can't dance without it being a competition. You can't sing without it being a competition. You can't even find love without going on an island or like some weird place where you be like, imagine growing up in that environment. So, and then we wonder why they grow up being perfectionist, fear of failure, imposter syndrome, comparing themselves to others constantly, not feeling good enough, right? But that's because our society slowly has destroyed that notion of community, sense of belonging, and positive relationship. Knowing, that you could rely on your neighbor, or, my parents worked, I'm from a working class family. My parents were at work when I came back from school, but the neighbors would keep an eye on us. And we would be out with the other kids in the area out, and looking out for each other. And I think we've just lost that sort of whole, so I think this is also part of that journey that I'm on, and everybody who's home educator is on. It's like, it's also like the making sense of, well, if I'm not an individual on this hamster wheel that needs to aim for this sort of success and all of those things, then who am I? What's my contribution? And because sadly, that notion of I'm just a mum is not really validated, well, I'm here to tell you it is. It's probably the most precious job ever. Like the relationship I've built with my two boys for the last 18 months is just priceless. Nothing can replace that. And as they're teenagers, the connection we have.
And what would that have been like if you'd still been at the university, still working? And
well, it would have been completely different, because then they find their friends, their group of friends who are immature
and they look
like
to them.
And then at least now we can have conversations about what's going on for them, and like sharing and openly sharing and things. And I think that's really important, because that's also part of where the issues are, is if you're seeking solace from your friends who are equally as immature and clueless as you are, that's really challenging for a teenager.
It is. It's huge.
At least I haven't cried, which is good.
I know. Fabienne, thank you. I've really, for me, this feels like the most important podcast I've done so far, because it unpicks, it's the crucial thing to everything else. And it just feels really important to kind of be, certainly within my podcast. So I'm really grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure connecting with you, Sarah.
And for the listeners, all the things that we've mentioned today, Fabienne's books, Fabienne's podcast herself, will all be in the bio at the bottom. So please do go and have a little look at those. For now, I just would love everybody, I hope, to take from this podcast how important their role as a mum is, whether you're a teacher, whether you're not a home educator, whatever you are, to really value that, but also to value themselves and where they're at and their own well-being. So yeah. I hope it's been valuable for everybody listening today. And if you've got any topics or questions that you would like us to cover in the future, please drop me a line at hello@collageapp.co.uk. And until next time, take care and enjoy the moment.